All right, let me ask you something. You ever walk past one of those huge old courthouses and just feel tiny? Well, today we're diving into a really fascinating theory that connects those massive buildings to a history that might have been intentionally erased.
And really, it all kicks off with this one simple question about places we probably walk by all the time. Old city halls, those big government buildings. Why are they built on such a ridiculous scale? It's not just to look grand and intimidating. I mean, the sheer size often feels completely practical for people like us.
And this is where it gets interesting, because according to the source for this explainer, there's a saying that goes with this whole idea. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The argument is that this pattern is everywhere, and that maybe, just maybe, the official story we've all been told doesn't quite add up to the evidence that's literally carved in stone all around us.
Okay, so let's dive into the first big piece of the puzzle, the architecture, the buildings themselves. The theory we're looking at today says these places aren't just big to be fancy or ceremonial. No, it suggests they were actually built to be functional, but for people much, much larger than we are. I mean, think about it. We're talking doorways that just soar, way higher than they need to be. Staircases where each step is just a little too high, making them kind of awkward to climb. And get this, even furniture that's scaled way too big for any normal person. And the craziest part? This isn't just in some king's palace. We're seeing this in regular old government buildings all over the world. And it's not just the big front doors either. The source highlights that even the internal doors, the ones down regular hallways, are often 12 to 15 feet tall. I mean, what's the point of that? From an architectural standpoint, it's just a waste of money and materials. There's no aesthetic reason for it, unless it was built for someone who actually needed that much space. So, that's the million-dollar question, right? If these buildings weren't built for us, who were they built for? And this is where things take a really wild turn. The source we're looking at brings out what it calls its most powerful and, probably most controversial piece of evidence: old photographs. So here it is, the central claim. The theory states that from the 1850s to the 1890s, there's a whole collection of real photos showing individuals who were, giants. We're talking 8, 9, even 10 foot tall. And these aren't some mythical paintings or tall tales. The argument is that these are authentic photos from the very beginning of photography. Okay, but what about the easy explanations, right? Your mind probably goes to a few places. So let's break down how the source handles them. First up, medical conditions. The argument is there are way too many of these individuals in the photos, and frankly, they look pretty healthy and well integrated into society. Okay, so what about circus performers? Well, they're not posing for circus posters, they're informal, dignified portraits. And finally, the big one. Are they fake? The source points out that convincing photo manipulation just wasn't a thing back then. And here's where it gets a little suspicious, according to the source. A really weird pattern starts to show up when you look at how official institutions dealt with this stuff. Places like the Smithsonian or the British Museum supposedly have these photos in their archives, and they'll label them, person of unusual height or something. And then that's it. Nothing. The trail just goes cold. No follow-up, no investigation. So you've got these huge buildings and these huge people in photos from the same era. How do you connect the two? Well, this is the linchpin of the whole theory. The source introduces us to the idea of a lost global empire that it claims has been deliberately wiped from the history books. An empire called Tartaria. Now, we're not talking about some legend like Atlantis here. The argument is that Tartaria was a very real place. I mean, it was right there on maps for hundreds of years, in encyclopedias, covering a massive part of Asia. And then, poof, around the mid-1800s, it just starts disappearing from all the new maps and official records. Gone. Okay, check out this timeline, because this is really at the core of the whole argument. You see Tartaria as this huge empire on maps in the 1700s. Then, bam, by the mid-1800s, it's gone from the maps. And what happens right at that same time? Suddenly, we get this explosion of reports, photographs of giants, news stories about giant skeletons, and then, just as suddenly, around 1920, all of it just stops. The timing is just too perfect to be a coincidence, according to this theory. And it's not just pictures. We need to talk about the physical evidence. The source points to something really compelling. Tons of articles from mainstream newspapers back in the day, all reporting the discovery of giant human skeletons. And guess what? Those skeletons have also mysteriously vanished. And listen, these weren't some crackpot tabloids. We're talking about articles in the New York Times, the San Diego Union, legitimate papers. And for a while, finding a skeleton that was 7, 8, or even 12 feet tall was news, for sure. But it wasn't treated like some impossible anomaly. It was just reported as a fact, another day in archaeology.
But this is the real bombshell claim in the whole theory. So many of these old newspaper articles end the exact same way. They say the bones were packed up and sent to the Smithsonian Institution for further study. But if you ask the Smithsonian today, the source alleges they have absolutely no record of them. None. They're just gone.
Okay, so we've got giant buildings, we've got photos of giant people, and we've got newspaper clippings about giant skeletons that have all gone missing. So how does it all connect? This is where we bring it all together and look at the grand theory the source proposes. So the theory, in a nutshell, is this. These giants weren't gods or kings. They were more like a functional class. Think administrators, guardians, overseers for the vast Tartarian empire. Those massive buildings, they weren't palaces. They were their offices, their workplaces, built to their scale. It also neatly explains how these massive stone structures could have been built with such precision. You've got super strong, giant builders. And then the final piece. When Tartaria as an empire was conquered and wiped from the maps, this entire class of people was systematically erased from history, right along with it.
And the way this cover-up supposedly happened is really interesting. The source doesn't necessarily point to some big, sinister, smoke-filled room conspiracy. It calls it a passive erasure. It's the idea that institutions just decided not to look, a collective choice to not ask the hard questions, because if you connect all these dots, the picture that emerges would completely rewrite everything we think we know about our own history.
And that really just leaves us with these big, nagging questions that the source wants us to think about. First off, what aren't we being told? If a story this big could be buried, what else has been edited out of the history books we all read in school?
And think about this. What does it mean if we're living our lives inside a world we didn't even build? Walking through buildings made for someone else? What did we inherit that we've just collectively agreed to forget?
And the final question is maybe the biggest one of all. If you can erase an entire race of people and their civilization from the record in just a generation or two, what else vanished? What kind of technology? What kind of knowledge? What understanding of the universe disappeared when they did? In the end, the source material we're looking at here doesn't claim to have all the answers. Not at all. It just lays out the breadcrumbs, the buildings, the photos, the old news articles, and makes a pretty simple argument. The evidence is still here, hiding in plain sight. It's just waiting for someone to be brave enough to ask the right questions.